Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some ProRevenge. Before we start, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and we may send you some brownies in the mail. Alright, our first story today comes to us from OfPearlsandSwine. Topsy-turvy. Let's jump right in. I started dating a girl about 7 years ago. When we met, she was getting up on her feet and trying to find her way in life. I let my imagination take over and started envisioning her potential and what kind of life we could have together. I had never had the feeling of disarmed, punch-drunk love that I had for her, and that probably clouded my judgment. Throughout our time together, she would reach out and ask for money for things, repairing a car, paying a bill, etc. We were getting closer the longer we dated, and I would always help her, assuming that I was making an investment in both of our lives by helping her through a period of instability. In all, I probably gave her about $15,000. After about 4 years of this, I finally popped the question. She accepted, and we were married after a brief engagement. About 6 months into our marriage, she told me she had been having car trouble and needed about $2,000 for the repair. This struck me as a bit odd. By that time, I was more familiar with her vehicle and knew her explanation for what the issue was didn't make sense. One evening after she went to sleep, I went and had a look at the part of the car she had said was faulty. No issue. This set off alarms. I grabbed her phone and, on a hunch, typed in the amount she had asked for, and it returned a text message with a guy she had previously dated. Apparently, he had reached out and asked for help repairing his car, and lo and behold, he had asked for the same amount she had requested from me. My stomach turned as the thought entered my mind that maybe I had subsidized other of this guy's expenses across the time I had dated my wife. As I read through the messages further, I realized that this guy was Lester Diamond to my Sam Rothstein, and I had been played like a fool. Look up that reference if you're not familiar. I had spent my entire relationship as a proxy sugar daddy. I thought on this for a few weeks and tried to figure out what to do next. These sacrifices were not insignificant to me. I had been working as a surgical resident for much of our courtship, making very little money and working long hours to form a strong, solid foundation for our future. This was devastating, and I realized that I couldn't reconcile the situation. Once I had cooled down, I waited for an evening my wife went to bed early and I got into her phone. I caught up on the most recent messages she and her paramour had sent one another. Then I initiated a conversation with him. I posed as her and told him she had been drinking, she is a recovering alcoholic, and that she needed to get some things off her chest. I didn't go overboard, but I did send messages to the effect that she was not over him, and that her affections had grown since marrying me. I all but teed him up to move in for a relationship with her. I then abruptly ended the chat and asked that we not talk about the conversation again in order to avoid furthering her relapse, but that we both keep in mind what we had spoken about and see if we could make a life together work. I then deleted the text from her phone and hoped the two would proceed forward together. They did. I kept an eye on the texts for the next few months and progressively saw things heat up between them until it looked like she was committed to leaving me. We didn't have many assets together at the time, as I was still finishing a surgical residency, so I knew the divorce would be quick and painless, and that we would go our separate ways and she would start a new life with the guy whose underachievements I had been funding. So I filed for divorce and had her served papers. I was generous with the $10,000 in assets between us in order to make the split as quick as possible and went on with our ways to begin life anew. And you'd think that is the end of the story, right? Oh no, friend. You see, Mama didn't raise a cuck. In our state, not only are assets separated upon marital severance, but so are debts. And medical school is effing expensive. Really expensive. $250,000 expensive. So, the B ended up with parting gift of about $125,000 of my student loans. And guess who she shotgun married 2 months after our divorce? Fortunately for her, she'll only have to pay half of that amount, because if history does indeed repeat itself, he'll be paying the other half once their marriage ends as well. It was all I could do to not send them a piggy bank as a wedding gift. Best $15,000 I ever spent. I honestly wasn't aware that debts that somebody has before they go into a marriage would be split up if that marriage dissolves. In fact, that doesn't sound right to me. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Althar6. It says, "While I think you're right about debts like credit card debt or anything owned jointly, I'm 99.999% sure that student loans taken out in just your name are your responsibility. They're one of those sticky, can't get out of no matter what debts. Like, even bankruptcy doesn't impact student loans. I think in this case, even if somehow OP's ex ended up with half of his debts, if they decided not to pay them, OP would still be on the line for all of that money. I just can't see somebody lending money to somebody and then all of a sudden they have to go and collect it from somebody else. That just doesn't sit well with me." Our next story today comes to us from CaptainBaoBao. Park your car in a danger zone? Good luck to find it back. Let's jump right in. OP added at the top of this story compulsory, not US, not English speaker, not my story, 90s, and edited for typos. Alright, with that out of the way, here we go. This is the story of Mike. Mike managed the warehouse of a hospital. Said hospital was built in the 50s in the center of town. The stadium is on one side, the Justice Hall on another, and schools on a third side. There's also a caserne and 2 other medical buildings around, so the streets are crowded with cars searching for parking. One day, when opening the gate of the landing dock, Mike noticed a little car parked in the hospital internal court, near the 2,000-liter liquid oxygen tank. Of course, it is absolutely forbidden because 1, this is private property, and 2, the court has been planned before 35-ton trucks were the norm, and maneuvering is already difficult. And number 3, liquid oxygen is explosive. A car or truck hitting the tank would be a major hazard. It was a small Italian car, no advertisement, but it was the kind commonly used as a second car or to travel in the Dolomite Mountains where the roads are very narrow. So Mike makes some calls. The car is not owned by someone of the warehouse or the nursing staff. No doctors have such a small car. The reception made public announcements asking visitors to move the badly parked car to no avail. By 1800 hours, the car is gone. Okay, problem solved. The day after, the car is there yet. Same calls with the same result. Mike called the police, but the police cannot make it towed because it's a private place. And towing company won't do it without a police query. By chance, that day only lorries came to unload medical materials. When it is time to close the warehouse, the car is gone once more. On the third day when the landing dock opened, the car is already there. And now that is a real problem. The 35-ton truck from Germany must come this day. There's no way it can reach the dock without tilting the car and the liquid oxygen tank. It has become a clear and present problem of security. All the warehouse team exchanged ideas on what to do, but all feasible solutions have already been tried. It is when someone from maintenance team passed on a forklift with a pallet of plaster bags. It struck everybody at the same time. There is no way the Italian car could weigh more than 1 ton of plaster, so Mike goes to see the forklift driver while the team searches for a wooden pallet. Slowly, with many precautions, the forklift slid the pallet under the car, lifted the whole thing, and went and dropped the car off on the nearby street. In the first 10 minutes, the police are warned that a car is parked in the middle of the street blocking traffic. The said car is towed away in less than half hour. The truck had no problem maneuvering. 2 days later, rumors ran the hospital. It was the car of the director's wife. She worked in a medical building some streets away. While everybody found that Mike made a good move, they wait to see what will follow. It is now a global problem of management. Mike is called to the directors. As soon as he passes the door, he starts to explain, "Yes, I know it is your wife's car, but..." The director went, "What? No, I called you for an entirely other matter. I warned my wife several times. She had it coming, that see. Until the hospital closed 20 years after, the story has been repeated to each new worker and each medical student. Put your car under a tree if you want, but don't park in the landing dock court, because Mike will make it disappear. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Black Avenger. It says, I agree that this didn't turn into a ProRevenge story, but it should have. The person who parked their car in a dangerous spot not only should have lost their car, but their license to drive and their job as well. This puts people's lives on the line. It says so in the beginning of the story. I am just as angry with the police of the story and the towing companies as well. I think the one thing that I really like about this story is that they put the car right out in the middle of the public road, and the police, who didn't want to deal with it previously because it was on public property, well, now it was their problem and they had to come out and have the car towed. That worked out beautifully. Our next story today comes to us from AlmostFungible, and it's actually from the Nuclear Revenge subreddit. I figured you all wouldn't mind me tossing one in here. It is revenge after all. It's called Terrible Boss Gets His Comeuppance. Let's jump right in. Setting: high volume independent tire shop in northern New England, circa 2012. We'll call it 123 Tire. Target: evil general manager. We'll call him Jay. Aggravated parties: basically everybody that worked there at the time, but mainly myself and the receptionist. We'll call her Ruth. Backstory: so Jay had been the GM of 123 Tire since he got the previous GM fired in 2004. He was and is a complete narcissist who believed he could do no wrong, and if you didn't agree with him, God help you. Over the years, Jay had done a number of illegal things. For example, he was always very physical with his employees. One time, he was wrestling with another salesman. This was commonplace and unavoidable if you valued your job. And the salesman, we'll call him Paul, took a bad fall and broke his knee. In order to avoid the ire of the owner, we'll call him Lou, Jay immediately clocked Paul out and told him to go to the hospital. He also told Paul to use his own insurance, and that the company would pay the deductible in order to avoid a messy workers' comp claim. Paul did as he was told and kept his job, but his knee was never the same, and he ended up addicted to opioids thanks to Jay's actions. Jay also had an affinity for the ladies. Now, I must mention here that Jay is an ultra-conservative Christian father of 11 children, who believes that a woman's place is uneducated, barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. That being said, several female receptionists came and went over the years, with only Ruth sticking around because she needed the money and begrudgingly accepted the regular harassment. When he wasn't behaving inappropriately with every lady that walked in the door, he was behaving inappropriately with every other employee. Want to leave early on a slow day? Wrestle the biggest guy in the shop for it. Jay was big on wrestling. Big guy isn't in that day? Buy him a pizza. Trying to have lunch? Expect Jay to throw food at you. Want to schedule a vacation? Tough. He'll let you know the week before if you can take it. He was a complete child, and I put up with him for 6 long years because I couldn't let him win. The setting: it was the summer of 2012, and Ruth and I had had enough. Jay was completely out of control as usual, now telling me, a Latino, that if Obama won re-election, that he would make my work life hell come November. Ruth was going through a divorce, and he was trying to move in on her. For the record, Ruth hated Jay's guts. It was time to hit him where it hurt. Ruth was ready to drop a lawsuit for harassment on Jay and 123 Tire, and I was ready to drop one for constructive discharge. Now, suing an employer doesn't exactly look good on one CV, but we were both at wit's end. The revenge. Ruth and I decided one evening that Jay's ultra-conservative values must be shared by his wife and family. As he was always working, his wife must be the one who goes to the mailbox every day. I created a throwaway email and got him a Bill Me Later subscription to Hustler magazine, and Playboy, and Penthouse. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and he comes in looking like death warmed over. Turns out, Mrs. J didn't appreciate his new taste in reading material, and he's now living in a motel in the next town over. Now, he's not saying that his wife kicked him out, he's far too much of a narcissist for that, but I could put 2 and 2 together. He's decided that he's done with his wife and 11 children, and that he is going to start a new life with Ruth. After all, her divorce is going to be finalized at the end of the week. It was at this point that Lou's sister, co-owner of 123 Tire, and not a big fan of Jay, we'll call her Liz, overheard him talking to Ruth in a less than business appropriate manner. Liz later took Ruth aside and got the straight poop on what had been happening for the last several years, and that was that. The next morning, Lou called Jay to his office and was far kinder than I would have been. Jay was to lose his title of GM and go to work in another 123 Tire location an hour away until the end of the year. Beginning in 2013, Jay would need to find other employment. Jay was also not to contact the location that he had overseen and worked in for years. Also, the location that Jay was relocated to added an hour to his already hour-long commute. I suspect that Lou also encouraged Jay to reconcile with his wife, which Jay did. Epilogue. Jay ended his employment with 123 Tire in January of 2013 and never suspected any involvement from me. In fact, to this day, he stays in occasional contact with me. He went on to work for another tire store, this one a corporate chain, as a store manager, put his house on the market, bought a new one closer to his new employer, and everything. A year later, he was fired after bringing a 7-figure lawsuit on them. They settled out of court, and he moved back to the house he was in before, as it hadn't sold. Jay's next job was 5 minutes from his home, and his new boss was the guy that Jay had gotten fired back in 2004. That one lasted a couple of years until Jay gave up on finding employment in the area and moved himself and the whole family to the Midwest sometime around 2016. Now, in the Midwest, Jay has been unable to keep a job in the car business for more than a year, and as soon as each of his kids turns 18, they seem to move right back to the area they grew up in. His New England home sold in 2019 for less than he bought it for. Ruth still works for 123 Tire and is very happy there now. The icing on the cake. In early 2021, I finally left my job at 123 Tire, sold my house, and became a full-time RVer. I've seen 47 US states, including the Midwestern state and town that Jade now resides in. I looked him up when I got there, and he came to see me after he got out of work in my new RV. He said, "Boy, you must really think something of me to look me up and want to see me all the way out here." If he only knew the half of it. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called KPlatinum777. It quotes OP where they said, "He decided that he's done with his wife and 11 children, and that he is going to start a new life with Ruth. After all, her divorce is going to be finalized at the end of the week." KPlatinum777 says, "Well, gee, that might have been a good plan if he'd only consulted Ruth." I'm always amazed at the number of people who take drastic and often irreversible steps to be in a relationship with someone they don't know very well, who they've never brought those concerns up with, and who often wouldn't be interested if they did. OP responded to this comment. It says, "It does truly boggle the mind. As a bit of further backstory, Jay had been telling Ruth for a while that she needed to get out of the relationship she was in. It was actually the only good piece of advice he ever gave her, as it served a twofold benefit to her. One, her ex-husband was actually a pretty bad dude. Two, Jay took Ruth's divorce as the signal he needed to make more advances on her. The fact that Jay's wife gave him the boot at the same time was just even more incentive. Ruth knew what would happen, probably even more than I did." KPlatinum777 responded to this comment with, "That's somebody who facilitated a good result despite having every intention of doing a bad thing. It sounds like Jeff didn't want to help Ruth, he wanted her for himself. He was capitalizing on her then husband's abuse so that he could swoop in. And, given the way he conducted himself, there's no evidence that he'd have been any better for her. I can't help but sit back and think that there would have been two very lucrative lawsuits on the hands of OP and Ruth against 123 Tire. They could have taken them to the cleaners. I hope the company gave them a nice bonus for saving them from two very expensive lawsuits. Check out all 3 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.